Today we're going to be discussing Lesson 4, which deals with the voting process. Once again, you'll need to be filling out your review sheet as we go through the PowerPoint today. First thing we need to talk about just is when elections are held in the United States. There are a lot of elections that are held in the U.S. Almost every month there's an election. We elect far more office holders than most people realize. In fact, more than 500,000 of them, more than any other country in the world. So voting is a big part of the American life. Who controls the elections? What you want for your number one there is most election law in the United States is state law. Excuse me. The state government makes most of the election laws, and most of them are elections are for elected officials. The federal government does set some rules, such as when presidential elections take place. Your number two there, when do presidential elections take place? They take place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in Nebraska or in November. Congress can also require the use of things like secret ballots, those types of things. Voting is the most effective way for individuals to affect public policy in the United States, so it is very important that people vote. What are some of the controls of the voting process? And this is number 3 there on your review sheet. What you want for that is Congress can fix the time, the place, and the manner that elections are held. They can also set the time for choosing when elections are going to take place. They can set the date for the Electoral College and the date that the Electoral College will cast their ballots. They can require elections to be secret. They've passed laws to protect the right to vote, and they also can prohibit corrupt practices in financing campaigns or things for federal offices. Again, we said they also require these ballots to be secret. Ballot, that is the medium by which a voter registers their choice for who they want to elect. The next thing we're going to talk about on the review sheet here is the Help America Vote Act of 2002. It was passed after the 2000 election. We had a lot of problems with that election between President Bush, who actually won the election, and Al Gore. What happened is that a lot of the election places used these lever-operated or punch card voting machines, and some of these it didn't make a clean cut, and so it was really hard to tell how a person had voted, and there was a huge uproar, especially in Florida, and whether whether some of these votes counted or not, because some of them left what were called hanging chads. There was just a little piece of the paper, it didn't punch it completely out, and there was some discrepancy on whether those should be counted or not. So they passed the Help America Vote Act. And what that actually does is it replaced the lever-operated and the punch card voting devices. All of those had to be replaced by 2006. It did upgrade the training and the administration of a lot of the people that were doing the election and overseeing the elections. It provided for centralized and computerized voter registration. The big reason for this was to prevent a voter ID fraud and to make sure that people were easily identified that were supposed to vote. And the last part here is it allowed for provisional voting. If for some reason they thought a person shouldn't be allowed to vote, it would go ahead and let them vote, and then they'd come back later and decide whether or not their ballot should have been thrown out. Most states hold elections for state offices in November on even-numbered years. Basically, they take place on the first Monday after the first Tuesday, or the first Tuesday after the first Monday, just like our federal elections. Although some states, such as New Jersey and Virginia, they'll elect their officers in odd-number years. There's also a lot of city, county, and other election dates from state to state. Here in Nebraska, most of our elections take place for state, county, and local, all on the same date. As far as early voting wasn't done for a long time, and in fact, if you were going to be an absentee voter, usually there had to be a pretty good reason why you were trying to cast your vote in advance. We now have absentee voting, which is where you cast your vote in advance. without going to the polling place. And it used to be, like I said, it was done by mail, and you had to have a pretty good excuse in order to do it, like you were going to be out of the county or away from the polling precinct at that time, so you'd have to cast your vote in that way. Now it's pretty standard, and a lot of people are allowed to vote. In most states, you can vote absentee with what they call no excuses, and not having to say why you want to vote in that. About 2/3 of the states also let them cast their ballots at polling places several days before Election Day. I think that's all I needed for that on here. For that, as far as the coattail effect, what happens with the coattail effect, sometimes if you have a really strong Republican candidate, they'll kind of carry the ticket, and that people will ride the coattails of a strong candidate, and they'll just mark Republican all the way down. It is true that a weak candidate can have that same effect, and if they don't vote for a person, they may not vote for anyone in that party. And so they were concerned, they said that holding these state and local elections on different days from federal elections might kind of help to reduce this coattail effect if you couldn't vote for president and Gage County office on the same day. Now we're going to go through a bunch of definitions here. We're at number 8 on the review sheet. Basically, a precinct is a voting district. Usually there's 500 to 1,000 people in a precinct. And once you are assigned to a precinct, then you will go to your polling place. That's where you will actually go to do your voting. They have precinct election boards, and they basically supervise all of the election process. They open and close the polls. The times for these polls are usually set by state law. Usually it's somewhere around 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Usually this election board also counts the votes and sends in the results to the proper place that they need to go to. Another person that you'll see at a polling place is the poll watchers. There has to be a poll watcher, one from each party, and they kind of monitor the process and make sure that nothing happens that shouldn't. They're also allowed to challenge any person they believe is not qualified to vote, and they make sure that to monitor the whole process to make sure everything's done the way it should. As far as casting ballots and types of ballots here, there's lots of different ballots that you can use. It used to be that they would do voters would simply vote by voice and in public to an election board. That changed in the mid-1800s, and they started using paper ballots. During the times of political machines and the rise of political parties, they actually started using ballots that were printed on colored paper, so they would know how people voted. Now voting is done in secret, and it's done by the use of a ballot. The most often type used ballot is the Australian ballot, and it has 4 essential features. We are at 12B on your review sheet. Basically, the Australian ballot is provided at public expense. So somebody, the state, prints those up. Usually it's done at the county level. It lists the names of all the candidates. You can only get your ballot at the polls. Each person gets 1 ballot, and it can be marked in secret. There are a few other things that you need here. There are 2 types of Australian ballots. Most states use what's called the office group ballot. Basically, they're going to say for president and vice president, and they're going to list all the candidates by party. And then they'll do the senator and by party. Most states use this. Some states use the party column ballot, where you can see where it has all the major parties across the top and then the offices down the side there. A lot of states do not use this because it does encourage straight ticket voting or the coattail effect, where everybody will just vote for somebody of the same party. The next definition you need is a sample ballot. Sample ballots a lot of times are printed in newspapers. They're made available before the election, so people can actually go through and research and mark their ballot. They can bring these ballots to the poll to help them to actually vote in an election if they need to. Bedsheet ballots would be another thing. A lot of our ballots have become very, very, you take Universe ballot. off of that. I guess I'm on lesson 5 here. Sorry. Okay, the bed sheet ballot. We are on 12D there, the bed sheet ballot. Basically, it's ballots that are very, very long. Because we often vote for, we vote for school board and town board, we vote for county offices, we vote for state offices, as well as federal offices, all on the same ballot. A lot of these get very, very long. And sometimes having this long ballot leads to what they call voter fatigue or ballot fatigue. Where people just kind of get tired, kind of like you guys get on test fatigue sometimes. You just get tired of doing that after a while. Some people say that they should really have not elect so many local offices. If it's a person that actually makes policy, then yes, they should probably be elected. But if it's somebody that is just carrying out a public duty, such as a clerk or a surveyor or an engineer, maybe some of those should be appointed instead of actually elected to cut down on this bed sheet ballot. This shows the number of local government and public school systems by county in Texas, and you can see just how long some of their ballots might get with all of these different districts that they have to vote for. As far as how they actually count the votes and how the voting takes place, Thomas Edison actually is the person that created the first voting machine. There's two different ways or two different types of voting machines that they use. One is they're electronic, but one of them is the electronic EDP or electronic data processing. This is where you would have a punch card where you would punch it out and it would have to kind of count the ballot that way. Sometimes it's also filling in circles like we used to do for state tests and different things before they were on computers. Maybe your ACT is still kind of done that way, and then they run them through a computer. That's the electronic data system. It played a major role, as we said, in the Florida election with hanging chads. You'll see hanging chads there on number 15. This is when you can see where some of the pieces of paper didn't fall off the back, and there's a little bit that are hanging there. And then there was a lot of discrepancy about whether they should vote or count those ballots or not. And so it led to a lot of problems, and the America Voting Act that we talked about. The other one is the direct response machine. These actually work a lot like ATMs, where you make a choice by touching on a touch screen. Sometimes there's problems with these also. Sometimes they malfunction on voting day, and so it makes it kind of difficult to do that. Some states have gone to voting. Some fear that they could be hacked. A number of states have gone to voting by mail and only using mail. In fact, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado hold their elections entirely by mail. Some critics fear that voting by mail might be, lead to fraudulent as well. So we have here the hanging chads, which we talked about. Problems with DRE and internet voting. We said the DRE could have malfunctioning. Internet voting, of course, voter fraud is a big part of that. Could be a digital disaster. Another problem is just equity. Not everybody can afford a home computer. Not everybody maybe has a smartphone to vote on. So, of course, it would be a lot cheaper. You'd be able to increase participation costs, but it might not be quite as reliable with some of those. I need to jump back here with the mailed ballots. Sometimes there's problems with mailed ballots. 1 out of 80 are missing a signature and don't get counted. 1 out of 100 are thrown out for other reasons. 1 in 300, they miss the deadlines for when they have to do it. 1 in 900, no address. 1 in 7,000 actually have died, so somebody else has filled out their ballot for them. So again, lots of things that they have to be concerned about. We kind of talked about online voting here a little bit. It would reduce the cost. It would make it very quick and easy. But a lot of people are concerned about computer problems, viruses, hackers, and again, the fact that not everybody can afford a computer. We went through this pretty quick. We'll kind of review this lesson when I get back, but that should be about all you need here. This slide here does show the different ways in which Americans voted in 2012. And you can see that most people voted in person. Some voted by absentee because they weren't in their polling place. Some were not categorized. Some did the early voting. Mail voting was 4.9%. Provisional voting, where they let them vote and then they decided they'd figure out later whether or not their vote should count. And then the 0.5% was for those that were in uniform or overseas.